Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. It's George from Ireland. Here I am trying to keep my heating bill down. Anyway, in this video, talking about the Russo-Israeli relationship, and it's really at a new ebb. It's probably the most unfriendly it's been since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. So remember, the Soviet Union was one of the first to recognize Israel, and Comrade Stalin thought that it might even be a Soviet satellite founded by socialists and even a few communists. And of course, socialism and communism were all but unknown in the Arab world. Anyway, fast forward to the present day. At least 12% of Israelis were born in the Soviet Union, and there are others who've got their parents or grandparents who were born there. And so if they didn't come from Russia, then ever they're still Russophone, usually if they came from Ukraine or Kazakhstan, or often culturally Russian, and often not very Jewish, maybe only a quarter Jewish, sometimes on the father's side, and are not raised in Judaism. So often they were just opportunists who emigrated from the erstwhile USSR in the 90s simply to get away from an imploding economy. And so some of them had a certain fellow feeling for Russia that has obviously dissipated over the decades a little bit. And Putin really tried to play both sides of the street, being pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli. I think there was no contradiction. He's even described Israel as a Russian-speaking country. Obviously, that is less and less so because Russia's becoming more of a distant memory. But the 7th of October attacks by Hamas on Israel really changed things because Putin is often not one to mince words, but he did not denounce these ferociously, even though some Russian people were amongst those killed by Hamas. And Russia's now been calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, as have many people. I mean, and I lend my voice to that as well. But anyway, I'm not a government, curiously enough. And he even said that Israel seems to be considering using the same sort of tactics that the German military used against his native St. Petersburg in the Second World War. So he's sort of effectively branding them Nazis and so on, which of course the Israelis find to be hideously offensive. Anyway, so Hamas says that the fighting in Gaza has killed almost 20,000 people. This figure should obviously be treated with caution. It's at least several thousand, even if it's not quite 20,000. And Hamas says the great majority of those slain are civilians, mostly indeed women and children. And again, that's not terribly hard to believe, and Israel doesn't even vigorously dispute that one either. They just say, oh, well, it couldn't be helped, collateral damage, human shields, and so on. And there may be some truth in that. So Hamas, they released some dual citizens who were Russian Israelis first, and they said they were thankful because of Russia's decent attitude towards Gaza, because of Putin's humanitarianism. So Moscow has recently played host to delegates from Hamas and indeed the Iranian government to discuss ways forward. Could they release more hostages? Could they bring a ceasefire? Which is surely should win them some sort of plaudits. Even if you revile Hamas, it's in everybody's interest that this conflict should come to an end. Now, I know the Netanyahu administration saying, no, we must extirpate Hamas. But I mean, I don't quite agree, because even if you think Hamas is the devil incarnate, so many civilians are going to be killed in the process, and that's going to store up so much more hatred, which will one day be unleashed on Israel again. Even if not by Palestinians. But Russia's efforts to find a peaceful solution has won it some praise in the global south. Anyway, Tel Aviv has strongly spoken out against Russia's flirtation with Hamas. Prime Minister of Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's been in that office on and off for 28 years. Said about 14 years as prime minister, but not consecutively. And he leant more towards Russia than the majority of Israeli prime ministers. But even he has been exasperated, and he's just been pushed beyond the limit. And he's been vocal that he is rancorously disappointed with Russia's posture on the Middle East. And he would have hoped for a more cooperative and sympathetic stance from Russia, which has suffered from Islamist terrorism itself. The thing is, any Muslim, you're an extremist according to Putin if you oppose him, even if you're totally secular. But of course, people who are just medieval in the Muslim world are absolutely fine by Putin so long as they serve his interests. So he's utterly hypocritical, dishonest, treacherous, and dishonorable. But in 2002, Israel, along with the rest of the civilized world, voted against Russia's illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. But it did not impose any sanctions against Russia. Trade was as usual. You could fly from Russia to Israel and back, and so on. So Netanyahu, who fought shy of lending any practical support to Ukraine, any military aid, there was some humanitarian aid, because he did not wish to irk Moscow. So Ukrainians, and indeed Russians who wanted to escape the war, they shifted to Israel. They could enter the state of Israel without a visa and stay for up to 3 months, unless, of course, they're becoming Israeli citizens. Anyway, so this Russo-Ukrainian war has made Russia need Iranian drones ever more, the Shahid drones. And they've even got a factory manufacturing those in Russia these days. But that's actually pushed Russia closer to Iran, which, of course, is Israel's nemesis. So Israel is increasingly perturbed by that. And the Russians have been asking the Iranians, how do you circumvent sanctions? And Tehran has developed some expertise in this, because they've had sanctions for, well, I mean, in a sense, it's 1979, but more severe sanctions in the last 20 years, with a brief hiatus, the end of Obama, and the beginning of the Trump administration for about 2 years. So how on earth does Iran Air still fly when they can't buy spare parts of their Boeings and all that? Well, what they do is they buy them from former Soviet countries, particularly Armenia, and Armenia really depends on Iran for trade and so on. The only one of Armenia's neighbors with which Armenia has a genuinely cordial relationship. And the Armenians will order whatever part they need from the USA, sell it onto the Iranians for a 10% markup. And so the Russians are using the same method to get around sanctions. So relations between the Russian Federation and the State of Israel were amicable until not long ago. But you know, they've been badly damaged. Nobody's talking about breaking off diplomatic relations, and they've managed to survive contradictions up until this time. I mean, Russia's ally in the Middle East for decades was Syria. Got a fairly good relationship with Iran now, but they didn't always, not in the 1980s. But they've had military bases in Syria for decades. And of course, the Russian Air Force was crucial in maintaining the Assad tyranny there. But the Israelis were obviously hitting Iranian targets in Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And so Israel and Russia had to deconflict this. So they would coordinate to make sure that the Israelis didn't accidentally hit any Russians. But that meant that Russia was effectively authorizing Israeli strikes on their Iranian friends in Syria. Well, I think no more deconfliction will be taking place. So relations have turned sour between Tel Aviv and Moscow. But I think there's still a very low chance that Israel will be shipping any military aid to Ukraine, though it desperately needs it, because the Israelis think they need everything themselves. I mean, defeating Hamas is not too difficult. It's not a conventional force. I know with like a guerrilla force, it's very difficult to comprehensively defeat it. But they all thought somebody else might pile in. Would they have to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon? Would they have to fight Palestinians in the West Bank, Syria, any other Arab states, Iran? It doesn't actually look like it. So this conflict's not going to be that bloody for Israel. I know they had well over 1,000 people killed on the 7th of October. Since then, yes, they've had soldiers killed, but that's like in the dozens. It's not an existential threat to Israel. It's not a full-scale conflict, but nevertheless, they don't feel like giving any military aid to Ukraine. Well, thank you so much for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon to see thousands of articles and videos behind the paywall, and donate on PayPal to georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Bye.